Mr. Katyal, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you here for all of our guests at the Asian American Bar Association. I know everybody's really excited to hear from you, and I cannot imagine a more perfect guest at exactly this time in our year and our nation's history.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
Yeah, so I wanted to just jump right in. I was looking at your bio and going through your history, and there's so much there. And then I also realized that we're about the same age and felt very like I could have done more with my life. No.
I think you're doing okay. I'm not worried about you.
So tell us all how you got here, because I think you grew up in an era where maybe there weren't many South Asian attorneys coming up and moving to such prominent roles at a pretty young age, and still going incredibly strong right now.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Chicago. My parents are from India. They came over to the United States the year before I was born. And I grew up and only knew there was one profession called a doctor. Literally, people would come over and say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I would robotically say, "A doctor," because that was all my parents told me about. And it was, my parents hated lawyers. I mean, I remember playing this game Life or something where there was that you could become a lawyer. And my mom said to me, "Lawyers are liars. That's the job. That's the job." And so they really detested them. And so I was pretty sure that I was going to be a doctor. But I wasn't totally sure, because I did join the debate team in high school, and I was even though I was a shy kid when I started, I was actually pretty good at it, and so that started opening up my mind. My mom still was really trying to get me to go to medical school, so much so that she said, "Neal, if you apply to one of these combined 6-year college medical school programs while you're a senior in high school, I'll give you my car." So I'm like, all I had to do is apply. So I did. I got in and decided not to go. And I decided not to go because of something that had happened in my family. My dad lost his job in a pretty ugly set of circumstances. He was never one to complain about discrimination or something, but it was really blatant. And I was 13 at the time. And he asked me to help him. He's like, "You're on the debate team, so you can help me with the legal research." And he filed this pro se complaint in federal court, handwritten, some of it typed, but most of it handwritten. And it was quite amazing. His judge, federal district judge, John Haldeman, who's still serving, and Haldeman appointed him an attorney, which, as you know, in a civil case is extremely unusual, but he saw merit there. And so he appointed a civil attorney who worked on the case for my dad and got my dad his dignity back. And it was at that moment that I started to think, wow, the power of the law here, it's not just something for liars, it's something that could be used for good. So by the time I was a senior in college, I knew I wanted to go to law school. But I also thought about teaching, because I had so many teachers who'd given me back so much, and so given me so much, and so I wanted to give it back to other folks. So I went to law school and clerked on the Supreme Court, and thought I would teach, and thought I would actually do national security work. That's something I kind of fell in love with, and I think that was the plan. And I went to the Justice Department as the National Security Advisor, working for the Deputy Attorney General, a guy named Eric Holder, back in the Clinton administration. And went back to start teaching at Georgetown, thinking, I'll bide my time, Democratic administration, hopefully I'll be National Security Advisor. And then the horrible attacks on September 11th happened, and I was trying to figure out what to do, and started volunteering for some first responders stuff and things like that. And then President Bush opened Guantanamo. And when he did that, I said to myself, I have to stand up. Even though I'm a big believer in executive power, this goes too far. And so I created a test case that ultimately became my first Supreme Court argument, Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, and certainly nobody thought we could win it. And when we won it, it was at that point, it was a career inflection point. I hadn't planned it that way, thought about it that way at all. I was, focused on this one case and nothing else for, a period of really up 7 years. But after we won it, things did change for me, and President Obama asked me to go and be his number 2 in the Solicitor General's office and things like that.
Wow, that was quite a biography in about 2 to 3 minutes. Was there anything else about the Hamdan versus Rumsfeld case that I mean, it was such a big and important case at the time, and I know that a lot of us in the Asian American community, and then just the broader minority and social justice oriented community, that was such an important case. And was there anything else about that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe one, this is what happened in the case. I had signed up to represent this guy who was accused of being Osama bin Laden's driver, Salim Hamdan, back in 2003. And I've been trying to see him for almost a year. And the Solicitor General's office said to me, well, you don't really have a need to know. You don't really need to go see him. And you can make all these legal arguments. You're a law professor on your own. And I'm generally very deferential to the government. I'm like, yeah, I'm making these legal arguments, and then I was like, no, it's his case. It's not my case. I should be able to see him. So I asked for that in writing, that I wasn't allowed to see my client. And then they let me go see him because they knew I'd give the letter to the New York Times. And so I found myself on a plane to Guantanamo. They made it really hard for me. They made what is a 3-hour trip a 30-hour trip with like 8 hours of refueling in Jacksonville and all sorts of shenanigans. But I finally get there to see Mr. Hamdan, and it's about 11 at night. I've been traveling for 30 hours, and I get to Camp 6 where he was being detained. And he looks at me, and I have the translator and the military attorney I was working with, and he says, I want everyone out of the room except you, and pointing at me. And so I think he's going to yell at me. The guy's been in solitary isolation for 10 months. That is, hasn't seen another human face. Our CIA manuals say you do that to someone for 3 days, and it causes a risk of permanent psychosis. So I think he's going to yell at me. And instead, he looks at me, smiles, and says, I just want to know, why are you doing this? Why are you representing me? And I remember being taken aback, and I paused for a long time, like 45 seconds. And I remember very vividly the chain of thoughts in my head. I remember at about 45 seconds, I say to myself, God, Neal, this is why you should stay being a law professor. You're a terrible litigator. A guy asks you a question and you can't answer it. And then like another 5 seconds in my head goes on. I'm like, well, Justice Ginsburg, when you ask her a question, she can pause for as long as a minute before answering it. So maybe I'm okay. And then another 5 seconds goes by and I think, well, that doesn't matter. He doesn't know who the hell Justice Ginsburg is. So anyway, what I said to him, and this is almost verbatim, is I said, look, my parents came to America from India, and they came not because of the quality of its soil or its sports teams. They came for a simple idea, which is they could land on its shores and be treated fairly. Not perfectly, but fairly, and that their children would be. And I said that would have been always my experience in America. And, doors open to me going to the best schools, having the greatest federal jobs, despite, my parents not being born in America and the like. And I said, that's my parents' vision of America. It's my vision of America. And this is the first time in American history when a president has issued an order that says, if you're one of the 12 million green card holders, like my parents, or one of the then 6 billion people around the world, then you get sent to Guantanamo for when you're accused of a crime. But if you're one of the, American citizens, same crime, you can commit the same thing, commit a worse crime, you get the Cadillac version of justice, the American civil trial system. I said, we've never done that. We've never distinguished between citizens and aliens in that way. And so, that's why that case was so important to me. It was also, I think, really an amazing experience to work with so many law students. That was my team. Ultimately, Perkins Coie joined as well, which was amazing, because a lot of law firms faced reprisals at the time for any sort of help in this area. And working with the military attorneys was really phenomenal as well.
That's an amazing story, and sounds like a pretty incredible and intense experience.
Yeah.
Actually being on the ground in Guantanamo, meeting with your client who was being held there. I mean, I think we all saw, the various photographs that came out from Guantanamo that just were pretty shocking to the idea of this alternate justice system that was taking place there. So,
yeah, and one of the interesting things about it is that there are several thousand troops stationed there, and they've all been told, "Oh, you're the terrorist lawyer." So you walk in with a lot of hostility and hate to you, but you eat with them, you talk with them, they drive you, they interact with you, and you realize, and they realize, hey, we're both humans. We're here to do the best job we can. And there were remarkable acts of humanity among some of them, taking care of some of the prisoners, who obviously, was being held in some of the worst circumstances. And so, there was a lot of hostility and resentment, but there was also some really amazing experiences.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing is that that you realize that all of our differences, if you're put into a small confined space with somebody else, you usually start to find out more similarities than differences over time. So I'm glad you had that experience. I wanted to transition into a statement that you gave or you were responsible for that I think was very important for the Japanese American community and the Asian American community through the Department of Justice. AABA has some of the attorneys, including Dale Manami, who worked on the Coram Nobis cases arising out of the Japanese internments. Can you tell us a little bit how that statement through the Department of Justice came to be and your role in it? And any impact you saw that, I mean, I know that there was impact just from my own personal experience, but I'd like to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, so, the Solicitor General's office is responsible for federal litigation in all 50 states, not just at the Supreme Court. But in the summers, when the Supreme Court's off, it is an easier time in the Solicitor General's office. So I was running the office at the time as acting Solicitor General. Lena Kagan had been confirmed. And every summer in the office, I'd have a project. So my project in 2009 summer was Citizens United. And I just spent a long time on a deep dive on the history of the First Amendment and so on. So in 2010, I had this summer and I wasn't sure what to do. And I said to my special assistant, I said, I'm aware, I remember in college, someone telling me that the Solicitor General or the US government had lied to the Supreme Court in Korematsu. And I said, could we start going and getting all of those archival briefs, memos, and everything else? Let's pull it all up and go through it all. And so I did over a period of those 3 months. And I realized, and part of that tale had been told by historian Peter Irons, but there was a lot of documents and so on that just showed the US government lied about the Japanese internment. They said it was necessary for national security. Nobody with any credibility bought that, not even J. Edgar Hoover, who was no fan of civil liberties. And that there were smoking documents in the memos, literally things saying this will be the suppression of evidence if we put this forward, or don't reveal how the Office of Naval Intelligence's report that shows that all of this is security theater. It's bunk. And indeed, that Office of Naval Intelligence report said the only reason people are advocating this sort of curfew and internment strategy is because of racism. So it's all in there, and it's remarkable. And to me, sitting in that office, sitting in that chair of my predecessor, Charles Fahey, who went and lied to the Supreme Court, and not, sometimes you make a mistake as an advocate, you don't know something. He knew. He was told. He had two of his line attorneys say, we will not sign this brief if it goes in this way. And he went and did it anyway. And for that, he was amply rewarded with a seat on the DC Circuit for 30 years after his service as Solicitor General. And I remember reading that story and looking to myself and saying, God, nobody should become that person. And so I just did it. I knew it would be, upsetting to a lot of people, and the Department of Justice has had litigation over these, issues many times. But, at some point you got to do what's right. And the record was clear. And so I issued a statement, which I called a confession of error in those cases. It wasn't formally a confession of error, because when the Solicitor General confesses error, there has to be an actual live case. There wasn't a live case, but it was modeled on that tradition, because the Solicitor General, the Justice Department, the job is to tell the truth. Obviously, you zealously advocate for your client, absolutely. But your client ultimately is not the prosecution. It's not the national security officials. It's the American people, and it's the soul of what the country is about. And what happened there, not just in the Korematsu case, but in the Hirabayashi case before that, and some other cases like Endo, was reprehensible. So that's why I did it.
That's amazing. That I didn't know that was a project that basically you had just picked up, dug through all of the research, and initiated to the statement. And I'll say that statement that was powerful, and I think that to all of these generations of Japanese Americans, the older generations had a real sense of shame, of the accusations of disloyalty, and I think that really lifted a burden that people had been carrying around.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know a lot about this before I started. I mean, honestly, it was like the stray remark of someone in college, a professor of mine, that led me down this path. But afterwards, I did start speaking to audiences, and I remember very vividly, I went to the University of Hawaii Law School for a kind of Japanese American Citizens League meeting, and there were about 500 people. And I remember this one woman, she raises her hand and said, growing up, I didn't know anything about this. And in my history class, we talked about the Japanese American internment, and I came home and I said, Mom, did you know about this? And she said, my mom got a strange look on her face and then said, yeah, I was interned there at the time. But they didn't want to say anything about it because of the sense of shame about it. And the most remarkable thing about that woman, she then said, and my dad, while my mom was interned, was volunteering and fighting for the United States Army. And I started tearing up. And then 5 or 6 other people in the audience had the exact same story. Mom interned, kids interned, father volunteering and going and fighting for a country that was interning his wife and kids. It was unbelievable. And, these stories, I'm very glad that I did it when I did, so that some of this stuff starts more and more coming out.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard those exact stories. My father's family is from Hawaii and also in California. But yeah, it really did have a profound impact on a whole community who felt disenfranchised and disempowered over the whole history of World War II and the internment. I wanted to transition into other mistakes maybe of our government and your work in Trump versus Hawaii. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so these are the Muslim ban cases, and you may remember President Trump campaigned on the promise of a Muslim ban on December 7th, 2015, note the date. He said, quote, I, Donald J. Trump, are calling for a total and complete shutdown of all Muslim immigration to the United States. Yeah. And then he issued that travel ban on his first Friday in office that led to all those scenes at the airports, and revised it a few times and so on, and we challenged it at every stage, and we won in the District Court of Appeals, and ultimately in the Supreme Court we lost it 5-4, and it was a heartbreaking loss. I still think that it is a modern day Korematsu, that decision. I think the same types of antics that that underlay the Korematsu decision, underlay this Muslim ban. And it's heartbreaking to me to see the court side with this. But I do know that it's temporary, and that one day the very same fate that happened to Korematsu will happen to Trump versus Hawaii. Indeed, in Trump versus Hawaii itself, the Chief Justice went out of his way for the first time in his majority opinion, first time in the history of the Supreme Court, to condemn the Korematsu case. I fully expect that in some decades, a future Chief Justice will condemn Trump versus Hawaii in the same way, that this is not who we are. This is not America. We don't go and just rank discriminate against you because of your religion.
I think that's exactly right, and I think that's why it ties in with the previous discussion about Korematsu and the internment. It's this. You had it all the way to the Supreme Court, and then now there's this. I think this stain essentially that I'm hopeful and optimistic that future generations will change and move forward from that. I wanted to talk about the election. I've been watching your Instagram updates. I follow you on Twitter. And also maybe if you could contrast that with Bush versus Gore. And I think Bush versus Gore, in contrast to maybe some of the commentary I've been watching, was actually a real case. And there's been a lot of, I don't know if the word frivolous litigation in the last week is the right word, but however you would describe it. If you could tie those maybe together.
Yeah, so frivolous litigation is generous. So it's it's a joke, and it should be condemned as a joke. And first of all, there's a lot of overheated political rhetoric in which you have people saying massive, widespread fraud, Trump and his folks. But when the lawyers actually go and file stuff, because as you know better than anyone, you got to actually have a credible basis for anything that you file in court. They don't file widespread mass fraud. They, accuse 53 ballots here or there of being problems. But, so there's a real deviation between the political rhetoric and the legal filings. And then the legal filings themselves, I think, are not going anywhere. Trump has lost too much in too many states to ever make up in litigation. I was a junior lawyer on Bush versus Gore. That was my first big set of cases. And, I think there are two big facts there that are different here. One is it was one state, just Florida. Here, Trump has to overturn at least 3 states in order to win. It's just not happening. And number two, that margin was 537 votes. Here, it's a lot bigger in each of those 3 states that he's going to have to overturn. And then third, I guess, optically, Biden has always been ahead. And in Bush versus Gore, Bush was always ahead. And I think that's a very important thing because federal courts don't want to be seen as overturning election results. And that's what Trump is asking the courts to do. So I think this is all a sideshow and a distraction. I think it's profoundly bad for our American democracy. I'm not worried in the slightest about who's going to be inaugurated on January 20th. I think anyone who isn't a member of the Trump Flat Earth Society knows the answer to that. That's great, and I'm sure very reassuring for everybody to hear this evening. I wanted to talk about, and I did not know about this, your work on the death penalty. And it seems like it's again something that's driven from a moral or ethical core, like some of the previous discussions we've had. And so, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to that work and why you feel it's so important? Yeah, I've been thinking about it for a long time. I took a class in law school taught by Steve Bright, who at the Southern Center for Human Rights, who is as close to a modern day saint as they come. A remarkable class. He was a remarkable teacher, remarkable litigator and human being. And I've always thought about this question about, the state taking life as a really complicated one. I do understand, I work with a lot of victims crimes groups, and so I do understand the impulse on the other side. And I also think there have been some horrific crimes. And so, I've been struggling with it for a long time. At the Justice Department, when I ran the Solicitor General's office, I did institute a protocol for any death penalty case in which nobody could act on it in any way without, my personal involvement, and which is even more uncomfortable in a way, right? But I felt like I had to. When I came out, I really thought to myself, this is something that needs to end. When you look around the world, we're one of very few countries that executes people. It's certainly not, deterring any crime or anything like that. It's, as Steve Bright said in the title of a Yale Law Journal article, the death penalty, not for the worst crime, but for the worst lawyer. And that's who gets the death penalty. And so the disparities just to me are too great. And so I do want to fight this. I will fight this at every level. I am hopeful that with Justice Barrett on the Supreme Court, that she will see what I see, which is an inhumane system that I don't think can stand. And so I am anticipating bringing federal challenges and as well challenges in the state courts to the use of the death penalty.
That's amazing. And an area where we do need to see some movement towards ending it. Luckily, in California, we have a reprieve on the death penalty from Governor Newsom, but I think nationally, federally, it's important to take that on. So I'm glad to know you're leading, or at least part of that effort as well, and to know the cases are coming. I wanted to close out. We had a tribute this evening from a number of California state, federal, and Court of Appeal and justices and Supreme Court justices, state court, Supreme Court justices for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She impacted a lot of our members' lives, and I think a number of them clerked for her. And you mentioned her earlier, and I wanted to know if you had any thoughts or stories or anything you'd want to share about Ruth, Justice Ginsburg.
Well, she was just the most remarkable. I mean, she embodied justice. When you go on the Supreme Court, your first name effectively changes from Ruth or whatever to Justice, and some people deserve it more than others, and she really did. I argued in front of her 41 times. In almost all of those 41 times, she was the first question at the argument. She loved being first. She was always the first person each year to write a Supreme Court majority opinion and the like. She worked harder than a lot of other people because that's the way she grew up. She knew she had to. And in that way, it's very much like an immigrant story. Got to work harder to just get to be equal. And, she embodied that ethos. I argued my first case last week without her. And I was really glad that the arguments were done on telephone because I knew it would break my heart to walk into the chamber and not see her. And her voice we're going to miss her voice, like in a way that I don't think we've even grown conscious of it yet, because we haven't seen decisions come out in which she's not participating. But what she brought was both a technician's skill to law. She was just a phenomenally good lawyer and writer, but also a heart of justice. And, it's rare in this to get a Venn diagram in which both of those overlap as much as it did with her. But it did. And it's incumbent on all of us to try and carry her legacy forward. And that our girls and boys particularly take inspiration from her career, what she stood up for. And, I know there's a lot of demoralization right now. And I don't mean to be political, but just about the law, about justice after these 4 years. But the fact is, Justice Ginsburg grew up in an environment that was not hospitable, and she was able to rise above it. And I think a lot of Americans over the last 4 years have risen above it and will continue to do so, and will do so in her memory.
Perfect way to close this out, Mr. Katyal. Thank you so much for your time. I think That story about Justice Ginsburg kind of encapsulates the hope I have for the present time, for our Asian American members, that we can look to these leaders and their heart and their fight and their strength, and come together more as a society and a community, to make the world a better place. And it's an honor to sit down with somebody who has in a young career made so many important changes to our world. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Our members appreciate it.
Thank you.
And best of luck with all of the litigation it sounds like you have coming up. Thank you again, Mr. Katyal, and good night.
Good night.